Well, some really interesting work done by Monash University regarding the Disability Wellbeing Index. Let's chat about it with the co-author, Professor Anthony Harris. Anthony, if I call you that, thanks so much for your time.
My pleasure.
Tell us a bit about the background to this. It sounds like a really great idea, and I'm sure would give lots of insights. So tell us a bit about how this all came about.
This has been a project or program with quite a long period of development, years actually. So it first came about, I think, really when the NDIS was thinking about improving on its measurement of outcomes. As you know, it does have an outcome framework, and it's been talking over time about how to make that a better means of measuring how well it was doing and developing something that was fit for purpose. But I think generally there was a kind of desire in the whole sector to have some measure of the performance of the way things were going that was easy to use and it would be suitable for comparing across programs. And so it was first proposed by staff in the NDIS who were interested particularly in using a tool to help their resource allocation, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, what they should invest in. And so it came about from their initiative, but it's developed from there into something a bit broader.
And you've consulted quite widely, I see.
We have consulted very widely. The project involved really from the start thinking about what was important to people living with a disability. So we got together groups of people with different streams of life, if you like, both stakeholders and people with lived experience of disability in forums, in one-to-one sessions and in surveys. So over a period of time, for different aspects of the project, we consulted very widely with a range of people, both people, as I say, with lived experience, either as consumers, if you like, of services, and people who work for agencies who commission services and some providers of services.
How challenging was that? Because I guess in any walk of life, it's kind of hard to get consensus about a lot of things or most things. How difficult was that in this instance?
Well, getting people to participate wasn't a problem. People were very keen to talk about their life and about their experience of services, particularly experience with the NDIS, which of course has been such a major revolution in the last few years. But at the same time, most people have strong views about it one way or the other.
Yes.
And on the other hand, it's been frustrating for many people. So a lot of the discussion was actually around the services that they receive themselves. So people were willing to talk. It was a little bit difficult when we came to some of the trickier aspects of the project, which we were asking people how important things were in their life, aspects like family, like security, like services they receive. And that was more difficult for people to make those kind of assessments. And doing surveys, the other aspect was that people are a bit tired of doing surveys, particularly on the NDIS.
Yeah.
I have to say, we got the NDIS to help us with the survey, and that again was a positive and a negative. They have a large group of people who are able to talk about things, but on the other hand, they're a bit tired of answering questions. So our response rate wasn't always as high as we would have liked to have been, which we still think we've got a pretty good coverage of people who responded and talked about these things, but it would have been nice to get twice or three times as many people talking about it. And so there may be a few gaps. The other thing, obviously, with people with a profound disability sometimes find it difficult to answer questions on their own. Yeah. They need some help with it. We provided as much help as we could. We did one-to-one sessions with people, but inevitably some people relied on a friend or a carer to answer the questions, which made us feel sometimes we may not have got quite to the nub of the issue. We weren't often not talking to the person themselves with disability. We tried hard to do that. We tried to make it accessible, both the language we used and the way in which we contacted people and made it available. Nonetheless, there were quite a few people who responded through a friend or a carer or someone who's helping them. And so that's one of the difficulties, I think, in all this work, but we've tried our best.
So how does it work? Because I guess well-being is a very broad term, isn't it? And, well-being to you might be different to well-being to me.
You're absolutely right. Clearly, each individual has their own notion of what matters to them, and the index, ideally, if it was to be used for an individual to measure how well they're doing through their life, would be personalised. But this is not the purpose of this index. The purpose of the index really is to measure the average across a group of people who might be using a service, so we can assess whether that service is improving their well-being when it's introduced or when it's changed. So whilst the index could be used by an individual to sort of track their well-being, it's not designed to do that, because we do recognise that individuals will be quite different from each other. That said, what we found with the index was that the vast majority of people, the things that were important to one person were pretty similar to things that were important to the other. So we're quite clear that the life aspects, things like safety, independence, good relationships with your family and friends, those kind of things are pretty common amongst people. And they tend to give a similar kind of weight to them. What's more or less important in these things is pretty similar. There will be differences in different groups. So, for example, this is not an index that we designed for use, for example, amongst First Nations peoples. We didn't specifically look at the aspects of well-being that might be important to different cultural groups within the Australian population. So it is pretty much an average for most of the population. So I have to admit that there will certainly be groups of people where this may be less appropriate. For example, we haven't got an index for children who clearly think about things, and things that are important to them are different perhaps than adults. So that's work for the future. I think this is the first version of the index. I think it probably needs to be developed for First Nations peoples, perhaps for other cultural groups, for children, perhaps for things I haven't thought of, to be honest.
I guess you've got the template there to go forward with that. I'll ask you a bit more about the future in a second. What about in terms of who has access to the information? How does that work?
This will be freely available. This is an index which it's now, I believe, online. We launched the other day. It's online. People can download it. They just have to register and tell us who they are, maybe a little bit what they're going to do with it. But it's freely available and there's no restrictions. We'd obviously like people to keep it as it is and not tamper with it. Aside from that, it's available to download and people can use it. And I guess it's our child, if you like, and it will go out there in the world and will grow and people will use it as they wish. What I've mentioned before is how we think it is best used, but people will use it. And we hope we'll see some data coming in the future that might help us improve it in terms of what people think is missing or what works and what doesn't. So this is very much, as I said, version 1 of the instrument.
What about as far as the service providers or people who might be being sort of asked about what they're providing and how that's contributing to the well-being? Do they have access to this information as well?
Well, they'll have access. They can download the instrument and use it. We hope, in fact, that providers might do that. We're quite open to people using it to measure their own services. It was sponsored by the NDIS, but the owners of the instrument, and they may or may not use it in the future. That's a little bit unclear. As I said before, they're constantly updating their outcomes framework, and we hope that they will use the DWI, the Wellbeing Index, as part of their suite of outcome measures, and that may encourage providers to use it as a performance measure. But even if they don't, or in the meantime, I think it still could be useful for people providing services or running programs. They may want to use this in a survey or routinely give it to their clients.
Yeah.
And I think they find it useful. It's easy to use. We think it's easy to use. When it's used in the population, just how easy people find it. It's relatively simple, I think. It's easy to score, mechanism given on the website. And I don't see why people couldn't experiment with it and see if it helps them in the design of the services. Either groups of individuals or, as you say, providers, I think could find it quite helpful.
All right. What I might get you to do, Anthony, is if you email me the link to the information, we can put that up with our show notes. We put show notes up about the program every week. It's been really good to talk to you, and maybe down the track, perhaps when there's a few tweaks made or major changes made, it'd be good to get you back. I'm just kind of intrigued. The Centre for Health Economics, that's a rather interesting term.
Well, the centre's been around since about 1989 or 90, something like that. We've been around for more than 35 years. And we're one of a few centres for health economics, but I'd like to think we're the leading centre for health economics in the country and a leading one worldwide. And we've been involved, we're in the economics faculty, and we do a range of things from this kind of thing, outcome measurement, evaluation of programs from an economics perspective, looking at value for money, and looking at funding mechanisms, the way things are paid for, doctors, nurses, hospitals, drugs. And we look at mechanisms for improving the healthcare system through incentives and payments and generally improving resource allocation and value for money. That's our aim in life.
It sounds like you're doing a very good job, and this is really very interesting as far as our listeners go. So thank you for spending a little bit of time with us.
My pleasure. Nice to talk to you.
That's Professor Anthony Harris from the Centre for Health Economics at Monash University talking about the Disability Wellbeing Index. We'll put those details up with our show notes. Let's catch up with cyber